Welcome to Impact Media Presents Where Do We Go From Here? Series 2. I'm Kelly Redmond, your host, and we have a very special segment planned for you today. On May 30th, Dr. Clem Harris and I discussed the historical context of Black protests and the importance of other strategic actions to impact systemic change. As another form of protest, I suggested getting involved with our Black-led legacy civil rights organizations, including the Urban League, the NAACP. And today we've assembled local, regional, and national leaders to share insights, as well as solutions and opportunities to engage moving forward. So now I'd like to introduce you to our guests. Good morning. And yeah, I guess it's afternoon on the East Coast. Good morning, good afternoon, good day, everyone. How are you?
Great.
Hello, how are you?
Great.
So I'd like to first introduce Michael Lawson, if you could give a wave, President of the Los Angeles Urban League, Dwayne Crawford, Executive Director of the National Association for Black Law Enforcement Executives, give a wave, and Kyle Bowser from the NAACP Hollywood Bureau, Pastor William Smart, President of the Southern California SCLC, and Police Chief Kevin Williams. Welcome, gentlemen.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Let me first start by saying, because I've already gotten questions, there were women who were invited to join this conversation today. Although we are celebrating and uplifting Black men, fathers, leaders throughout the month of June in honor of Father's Day. But we did, and this is a continuous conversation and action plan, so women will continue to be at the table. But today, I'm representing Delta Sigma Theta, who I'm going to join our meeting as soon as this is over, Century City chapter. I'm representing Shaka Khan, and I am every woman today, representing lots of different groups.
That'll work.
On Thursday, an empowered, impactful group of Black women leaders, we went and met with Mayor Garcetti to let him know how important it was to have Black women's voices at the table when we're talking about change. And we hadn't been a part of the conversation over the past 2 weeks. So just want you to know we are moving forward on that front as well. And I bring all of the spirits of these organizations as well. So thank you so much for being here. I want to start off by talking about, if you could tell us a little bit about yourselves and start off by telling us, who you are, and in one word, how you're feeling about what's happening and what's been happening over the past 2 weeks. Michael, can you start off for us?
Certainly, and thank you for having me. Michael Lawson, President and CEO of the Los Angeles Urban League, a longtime resident of Los Angeles, California, born in Little Rock, Arkansas. Spent most of my career as a corporate lawyer and have had the honor of working for the Obama administration as an ambassador to the International Civil Aviation Organization. I've been with the Urban League for a little over, a little over 2.5 years now. The Los Angeles Urban League is going to celebrate its centennial next year. Awesome. We were first formed in 1921.
Yep.
And we have, during that period of time, had 8 presidents. I am the 8th. I stand on the shoulders of John Mack, who was just a tremendous force and a tremendous person to whom I looked up to. We would meet at Pacific Dining Car once a week, and I would listen and take notes, and I try to do what I can to honor his legacy.
Thank you so much, Michael. Really appreciate that. Dwayne Crawford.
Again, hello, everyone, and greetings, Kelly and Kelly. It's great to reconnect after a few years.
Absolutely.
So, we want to also applaud Impact Media and the work that you're doing. But again, Dwayne, Director for the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, NOBLE. Also bringing greetings have our national president, Serlin J. Davis, who's the police chief of Durham, North Carolina, and also our regional vice president, who is Chris Waters, and she's Region 6, that also represents Los Angeles. I just want to say one word that would sum up my opinions and thoughts right now: vote.
Yeah. Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Dwayne. And, you know, we'll shoot over. We appreciate you bringing your colleague and comrade in the fight, Police Chief Kevin Williams. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please tell us a little bit about you and your history and your activism. Thank you so much.
Okay, greetings to everyone. My name is Kevin Williams. I've spent the last 42 years in law enforcement, starting out with the Detroit Police Department. I spent 20 years, 3 months and 16 days with the LAPD and got the hell out of there. And I have worked for 3 different departments as a chief, including being the chief of police at the University of Michigan, Dearborn. Currently, I'm serving as a chief at a small public school here in New Hampshire. In terms of one word, angry. And I want to define that because I'm angry about the death of Mr. Floyd and angry about the death of so many other people that look like you and I. So that one word pretty much capsulizes it. I agree with Mr. Crawford with respect to vote. That would be my second word. My third would be to pray. So you asked for one word, I'm giving you 3.
That's fine.
In terms of activism, I don't necessarily see myself as an activist, but when this video is over, people certainly don't think I am.
We know you are.
You.
That's why you're here. Dwayne already brought. Dwayne let the cat out of the bag. We already know. So thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to go to Pastor Smart now. Thank you. Pastor Smart, can you unmute yourself? Okay, he might be frozen. Kyle.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much,
sir.
Kelly, for inviting me to be a part of this. Oh, you know what? I see Pastor Smart is.
He's coming in. Yep.
Are you ready, Pastor Smart? You're live now, Pastor Smart.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Pastor Smart, President and CEO of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Southern Christian Leadership Conference was founded by Dr. Martin Luther King in 1957, and our chapter here was started in 1961. We have been working on racial equality, overcoming prejudice, and we have evolved into an organization that works on educational, economic empowerment and employment. And of course, our old important ones is voter participation and empowerment. And so it's a crucial time now for organizations like us as we look with this current uprising, while we also look toward the census and voting in November. Thank you.
Absolutely, Pastor Smart. And one thing I'd like to mention, giving honor to one of my dear mentors, and I've been adopted by Reverend Dr. C.T. Vivian, who actually led the SCLC nationally in his 80s, 90s. He turned 95 last year. We had a big celebration for him there, and we'll be 96 next month. So we thank God and honor him this morning as well. Thank you, Pastor Smart. All right, Kyle, thank you.
Kelly, thank you again for having me, and it's an honor to join these other gentlemen in this discussion. My name is Kyle Bowser. I'm here on behalf of the NAACP Hollywood Bureau. Of course, the NAACP was founded in 1909, but the Hollywood Bureau was launched in early 2000s. It was an immediate reaction to the absence of African-American presence in the Hollywood commerce and the awards process. If you watch the Oscars, you never saw Black folks taking home any trophies. And so in response to that, the NAACP went into action and started to engage the industry in trying to figure out ways that they could be more inclusive. And the Bureau has done very well over the years in bridging those gaps and developing rapport with the industry. I guess our primary constituents, of course, are the Black Hollywood community of writers and directors and actors and producers and the like. And so it's a pleasure to be here to represent that community of folk.
Thank you so much, Kyle. And as you know, I am very active with the Hollywood Bureau and have partnered with Ron as well as Robin, you know, over the past 9 years that I've been here. Thank you so much for being here and representing the Bureau, because Impact Media, I actually came up with the concept and the call and heard the call when I was in Chicago around the importance of using media and entertainment for social change and building the kingdom of God.
Okay.
And, you know, of course, as soon as I got here, I went straight to those organizations and a lot of the partners that are represented here today to continue this work. And it's a pleasure to work with each and every one of you doing this very, very important, critical work. So we'll keep going and delve into the questions a little bit more. So during this phase, I'd like us to talk about, you know, your primary programming efforts for your work and your organization, and what you would say is your primary call to action or campaign that you're doing right now today. And I'd like to start again with Michael.
Thank you very much. The Los Angeles Urban League throughout its history has been focused on economic justice. So we've been focusing on jobs and entrepreneurship throughout our career, throughout the existence of the organization, working with corporations and foundations to also had and continue to have an advocacy arm that is probably the most important aspect of what we do. But in terms of programs, we do job training programs. We have programs in place right now. We're training people to get into the construction industry before the pandemic hit. As a matter of fact, throughout the pandemic, what you see, the people that you see working are people in construction. There are more cranes in Los Angeles than any other city in the United States. So we're training people to get into that lucrative field. We're also training people to become entrepreneurs and training entrepreneurs to become better entrepreneurs. We also look at youth in STEM and tech, and we have programs in all of those. But right now, but we never lose sight of the fact that advocacy for our people is front and center, and the number one thing that we do and what people look to us to do.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Dwayne, are you ready? Oh,
yes.
Do you want to say something else, Michael?
One quick little footnote on the entertainment side. One of the things we are training people to get into the entertainment industry on the in backstage careers, to make sure that we diversify that aspect of the entertainment community as well.
And Urban League and Impact Media have a history of supporting one another over the years in that area. And years ago, and we're just starting to do more programming lately, and look forward to seeing how we can support each other there too, Michael. Thank you. Dwayne, you ready?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
All righty. Greetings.
I also wanted, I was remiss in doing this earlier, is offering our heartfelt condolences to the family of Mr. Floyd and Ms. Taylor,
yes,
Mr. Arbery, but also, and this is sad, we can do this by first name, Sandra, Tamir, Trayvon, Eric, Freddie, Walter. And it's sad when we do that, because I don't even have to even give your viewing audience a last name. We know names, but also there's countless others. And we go back to our forefathers and our foremothers, we know the debt that was paid by so many well before us. And I want to start off by saying that. But from a mission standpoint, the mission of NOBLE, National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, is really to ensure equity and administration of justice. Now, yes, we are a law enforcement organization, but we were created, and our founders in 1976 was really based on how can we ensure this issue of racism and opportunity. For example, back in those days, you probably didn't have a whole lot of African-American police chiefs. Right now, Noble members lead over half the major cities in the country. But back in 76, you really did not kind of have that level of influence. But those men and women at that period of time came together, created this organization. But I want to say it's about ensuring equitable administration of justice. Now, program-wise, we consider ourselves the consciousness of law enforcement. I'm going to say that again, the consciousness of law enforcement. So a lot of our work is how do we empower and educate citizens in getting the reform they want to see in their local law enforcement communities. For example, every citizen, believe it or not, has a whole lot of opportunity but leverage in getting the reforms they may want to see in their local community. So we do a lot of work with young people, parents, adults, and empower them. I should also say, especially this period of time, a lot of work is being done on the congressional legislative side. For example, we've made it very clear we stand. We condemn the death of Mr. Floyd. We also are saying, let's get, while iron aside, comprehensive reform across the law enforcement spectrum. We'll get that a little later. And then the last one I just want to say is we'll be participating this Tuesday. There's going to be a U.S. Senate hearing on use of force and community engagement of law enforcement. This Tuesday, Washington, D.C., there'll be a U.S. Senate hearing, and we'll be participating on that. It'll be at 2:30 p.m. on Tuesday, and our national president, Serlin J. Davis, will be a witness testifying on behalf of Noble. And we will make it clear where we stand. But I would say one last thing. There's a bill that we've got to get on top of. It's called the Equity and Policing Act. Justice and Policing Act. It is a Congressional Black Caucus driven bill. Senator Booker's, Kamala Harris, Congresswoman Bass, but we are 100% behind that bill. Again, it's called Justice and Policing Act. But thank you, everyone.
Dwayne, thank you so much. And please get that information so we can distribute that widely throughout social media. And we'll make sure when whatever else, we can do in specific action. Is there something specific that people can do right now regarding attend the, watch the hearing?
There are two things. Believe it or not, though I know we're focused on kind of the national area here, locally, every citizen should want to communicate their viewpoints on these protests, your viewpoints on policing to your elected officials. When we respect the right of people to exercise their First Amendment rights, absolutely. But I'm also encouraging people, yes, be mad at your police chief or be mad at that officer, absolutely, we get that. And me first also say this, the lion's share of officers do a great job. But that mayor, the city council, the city manager, county commissioners, I also have not seen a sign yet saying, city council, remove, or mayor, or city manager. The reason why I say this, I don't know any chief, and Chief Williams can talk to it more than I can, I don't know of any chief I know of that is exercising policy that's contradictory to those that are in power, meaning those elected officials. So I'm not asking people to do things unlawful. I'm asking you to protest, exercise your First Amendment rights, but I'm also encouraging you to go upstream. And that everyone can do, whether that's calling, emailing, visiting, going to city council meetings, but making it clear, not what Dwayne Crawford wants. What do you as a private citizen expect from your police department?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Perfect segue to our chief, Chief Kevin Williams.
Okay, greetings to everyone. I'm actually going to change my response to the first question based upon some of the things that Dwayne Crawford said. The primary call to action, I am not here to represent any organization. I'm here speaking based upon my 42 years of law enforcement experience. And Chief John Thomas, who's the chief at the University of Southern California, he said something to me years ago that resonates, and I've never forgotten it. He said, you cannot fake community policing on a college campus. Now, why is that relevant to this discussion? Because most of the issues, if not all of the issues where we're talking about the deaths of people, are related to municipal agencies. And you have lots of campus police across the United States, but you're not seeing the same thing. And the reason being is because there is resolute oversight of campus law enforcement by the leaders. And they set the tone in terms of what is acceptable in terms of the delivery of police services. On a college campus, just like Chief Thomas said, on a college campus, you can't fake community policing, because on a college campus, you actually have a community that is resolutely engaged, and they will make it crystal clear from day one what they will and will not accept. He was right. The second thing I want to say is that vote. Dwayne Crawford talked about that, but I want to explain one of the reasons why. The litmus test, and this is critically important for your listeners to hear, the litmus test for police use of lethal force are 2 U.S. Supreme Court cases, Tennessee versus Garner and Graham versus Connor. And if the police actions are deemed to be lawful within those 2 parameters, that is the reason why most police officers are not criminally prosecuted, or if they are not found guilty, because they did not commit a crime based upon these 2 Supreme Court decisions. Now, last I checked, there's only one person on this planet that can nominate people for the United States Supreme Court.
That's right.
That happens to be the President of the United States.
You're right.
So
unfortunately,
he is our president.
Right.
And so the reality is, if you disagree with the way things are done, it's important for you to exercise your absolute right to vote.
That's right.
Yes.
That's one of the reasons why it's so critically important. In other words, what I'm saying is, based upon the current configuration of the United States Supreme Court, things are not going to change in my lifetime. They simply are not, because they have lifetime appointments.
That's right.
So therefore, we need to implement something that one of my former mentors, Bernard Parks, said.
That's right.
A long time ago. He used to be the police chief in Los Angeles. And he said, what we need to start doing is assessing the tactics of officers before they are in a situation where they can lawfully use lethal force. That's when the litmus test kicks in. So even before that, what did the officers do to put themselves into a position where they can lawfully use force? He started doing that. There was pushback. I've adopted that on every department that I've run. So you can't be on the sidewalk, see a car speeding down the street, and then step out into the street where the car is likely to hit you, and then you pull out your gun and shoot at the car because your life is in danger, saying, well, Tennessee versus Garner and Graham versus Connor. I'm going to spank you for using improper tactics that cause you to choose to put yourself in danger, which then elevated the situation. And I will wrap it up with this. It doesn't cost any money to implement that on any department, sheriff's office, police department, no matter what the law enforcement agency is, that can be implemented right now. And that is in fact what the people want. Check yourself to prevent yourself from intentionally getting into a situation where you have to escalate to the point of using lawful lethal force. I'm done.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chief Williams. All right, Kyle, you're up.
Wow, that's a lot to take in and a lot to try to follow. My tendency is to try to zoom out and really look at some of these complex questions from a 30,000-foot perspective. I'm obviously not at all involved in the sciences of law enforcement, so I can't speak to any of those specifics, but I do see some common thread between the law enforcement experience, the Hollywood experience, which I know a great deal about, and then even more broadly, the whole thing that we call the American experiment.
Hey, Kyle.
Yes?
If you could focus on specifically what Hollywood is doing and can do.
I will.
As it relates. Thank you.
And I know time is of the essence, so I'll try to not be
I appreciate that. Thank you.
verbose. But let's start with this premise. None of this experience that we're all having was created for our benefit. That would start most broadly with the nation itself, right? And then if you wanted to do a specific look at the law enforcement institution, you know, the word officer is a derivative of overseer. And so we know where the origins of that started. But even in the Hollywood experiment, Hollywood was created by a faction of Eastern European Jewish people who wanted to essentially control the image machine, and thought and knew that by controlling that image machine, they would enhance their own ability to assimilate into a culture that was not created for their benefit. And so whether you're in law enforcement or you're in Hollywood or you're just an African American living the American experience, you spend every day trying to rebend the original purpose for which the institution that you operate in was created. And that's a tall task. I never responded to the question you asked earlier about one word in reaction to what's happening today. My word would be perplexed, because I'm amazed at the reaction that the George Floyd death has sparked around the country and around the world, particularly with non-African American folk, right? George Floyd, unfortunately, is not the first person to have that experience, or for it to be telecast, or for people to have an intimate awareness of it. But for some reason, this incident seems to have been the straw that broke the camel's back. And I think what we all have to ask ourselves is, as folk operating in the Hollywood space, or people working in law enforcement, or perhaps white people in America, what can we do to redefine the original purposes for which this experience that we're having were designed? And so that's my comment.
Thank you, Kyle. Can you tell us anything about how people can engage with the Hollywood Bureau? Are there any programs that are kind of public facing? I know the industry professionals are engaged, but is there anything that the everyday person can do to support?
Yes. Again, broadly, I'll start with the fact that the NAACP a month or so ago launched a campaign, the slogan of which is "We are done dying." And that campaign was, and it's trending very, it's a very popular hashtag that's all over social media. But that campaign was designed to speak to a whole host of issues that the African American community faces, whether we're talking education or health or police reform, environmental issues, across the board. We are done dying, and we need to be very proactive about what measures we can take to turn those tendencies around. Of course, right after the campaign was launched, however, we saw a rash of killings. Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and then George Floyd. And so the public has now glommed onto that hashtag, "We are done dying," and really focused in specifically on this very current issue. But to answer your question about Hollywood, we're done dying in Hollywood as well. And what I mean by that, it is time for the African American experience to be articulated more prominently by African Americans, to include all the nuance and subtlety and all of those things about our experience that we know intimately, and for too long other people have been telling from a tangential perspective and getting wrong, quite honestly. And the biggest, I think, the biggest misfortune of all of that is that there are too many of Black Americans who have adopted the imagery and the significance of the imagery that are created by non-African Americans. And we have to stop that, and we're done dying from the impact of that.
And I'll add, we're done having other people tell our stories. We can tell our own stories. We have our own stories to tell.
That's right.
And we're going to continue to do that and uplift those, especially those that help change the narrative around, I say we've kind of become the protector and the police of the Black brand, and how we're portrayed, and ensuring that we change the narrative when others are controlling it. And sometimes when some of us are controlling it, we have to be unified around that. And Kyle, I also want to chime in about engaging with the NAACP and the Hollywood Bureau in particular. Last Friday, there was a protest that Hollywood organized in support of all that's going on. And they organized a very peaceful protest. And it was actually on the birthday of Breonna Taylor. And so it was a beautiful, beautiful protest. My daughter, Jada, who was an actress and a theater student at Pepperdine, we were there and in support, of that. And that's our one protest for this year. We're doing it other ways otherwise. And if we weren't in the middle of a global pandemic as it relates to this coronavirus, we would be out a lot more.
Right.
But it was absolutely beautiful. Were you there?
I was not there, but as you know, Hollywood is a community that maintains an appearance of liberalism at all times.
Yeah.
It has been a challenge sometimes to get the industry to actually behave in the ways that it represents, but we're working on it.
Yeah, there was a lot of support. Beautiful crowd, multiracial, multi-ethnic, and very peaceful. And even the drivers, going by. There was only one driver who said, "But Blue Lives Matter too." And we're like, we don't disagree. It's a both and, not an either or.
That's true.
So,
You're right.
Yes. Right. So thank you, Kyle.
Sure.
Pastor Smart, thank you so much. Tell us a little bit. I know that you're not going to be able to stay long with us, Pastor Smart. Can you please let us know how everyone can engage, support the SCLC locally, nationally, and you're free to stay as long as you can. And if you need to go, we understand. Thank you.
No, thank you. I'm just having extreme technical difficulty, and we joked earlier. I'm gonna say it live why one of the reasons for this,
right,
jokingly, but I don't understand it. But
I know you do this all the
SCLC
time. I wasn't going to put you
locally
on
has really
blast,
been
but you put yourself on blast.
Yeah.
No, thank you, Pastor Smart. Do you want to tell us about some of the programming and how people can engage? Do you want to tell us about some of how people can engage with you? Like, what's the most impactful thing people can do with SCLC today, tomorrow? And
during the COVID virus pandemic, we have been feeding people tremendously, and we feed every Friday through our Hurting and Hungry ministries and our Poor People's Campaign. So we have been feeding right along, and it has increased, and our support has increased. That way, we are. And so, if anybody want to come down and volunteer, or they could just call us or email us, and they'll find out where we are that Friday. We're getting ready for a massive feeding in July, early July, a month of food we're going to give to those that qualify for that. That's one thing. On the other side, we've been protesting. We've been very close working with one of our allies, Black Lives Matter, through this whole process. And it's good, as many of our police officers that are on this call. I think one of the things that is real important is that Black officers really speak up. I think that's really important. I really appreciate, like, the sister who in Fort Lauderdale who chastised her colleague for pushing someone right then and there on national TV. More of that has to happen, and so by our Black. And so I like to say that it's we need more Blacks. We need more Blacks that are in blue rather than blue that are in black. What I mean, I know my brothers from Noble understand what I'm talking about there. Absolutely, because I've worked close with them on other things. And so SCLC is just still out there, not only feeding, but protesting. We're going to be leading a protest for women. Women in SCLC they're getting ready to plan right now to have one next Saturday for Breonna Taylor. Just not brought for those officers in Louisville.
Okay, Pastor Smart.
I think,
we're losing your audio a little bit.
I was out there 2 Saturdays ago in the middle of people who were doing violent acts, trying to
Pastor Smart, we can't really hear you too well. I'm just gonna, if you mute yourself for a little bit and kind of get situated, and we'll bring you back. And while you're doing that, I would like to say that this Sunday is a very special Sunday for the SCLC and churches and organizations across the country. It's Black Church Sunday for the census this Sunday. Okay. And Positive Impact Campaign has shared information that is applicable across nationwide. So all Black, there's a toolkit that we've posted. It's also on the SCLC Southern California Facebook page as well. But Black churches across the country, please mention the 2020 census this Sunday from your pulpit in your home this Sunday. I don't think any churches have been released to go back full time yet, have they? I haven't heard that, but please give a little airtime, pastors and church leaders, this Sunday. So, okay, Pastor Smart may or may not be back, but we thank him so much for his participation. His contribution is invaluable, as all of you have been and are. So let's move into the next segment, where we're going to talk about, what is working, to support anti-Black racism, and that movement, and what needs to change. So we'll start with Dwayne this time.
So I just want to echo what Cal said earlier, is that probably not since Occupy Wall Street and protests like that are we seeing the amount of our white brothers and sisters that are joining in this protest. And I'll say this again, we at Noble support your right for freedom of speech and right to assembly or to protest. Now, we want to make sure you're doing it safely and want to make sure you're doing it lawfully. But at the end of the day here, one is keeping up people, all Americans, sharing their voices of what they want to see. There's the law enforcement part of Mr. Floyd's death, and yes, it was murder. That's part of, I think, what's going on. This other part is my humanity should be respected and appreciated regardless of my race. And what I'm enjoying and I'm encouraging people is to have your voices heard. Number two, what's working is seeing the amount of pressure being put, not just at a national level, but seeing city councils, for example, saying, we're going to outlaw chokeholds. And that's why I get back to this local element. The barriers of entry are a lot lower in a local environment, meaning I can go to my city council, my mayor, my county commissioners, what have you, city manager, and demand that. And then lastly, I'll say is seeing the kind of legislation that's kind of coming together. Now, I'm gonna say this from a cautionary standpoint. With all these efforts, it's going to take a bipartisan bill. So, making the assumption that many of us and all of us are Democrat, we're gonna have to find a way, right? With the White House, folks don't want to hear this, with the White House and with the US Senate to get a bipartisan bill. That to me, I think, and the reason I'm bringing this up, we should be honest with our constituents. Even with all of our ideas and our passion, our protesting, right? It's gonna require Republicans, both absolutely and nationally, to also get on board. Now, I'm not saying they don't want to get on board, but I'm just saying it's going to take a collective effort of Americans to get this done.
And you know what, Dwayne, I'd like to say, in addition, you mentioned earlier about contacting your elected officials, yes, but we need to flood the Republicans with absolutely our thoughts and comments. We need to let them know we're holding them accountable too, regardless if we voted for them or not. I agree 100%. They have a responsibility to all of us as well. And we need, instead of going and badgering the ones that we know are doing something, we need to go to the others and make our presence known.
I agree.
So another thing I'd like to spotlight, since you're representing Washington, D.C., your mayor, and something that's working, that bright yellow Black Lives Matter on the street in front of near the White House, that's working and being represented in cities across the country.
I'm heading back up there. I'll be there for the hearing on Tuesday. My goal is to get a selfie.
Right.
Image. But yes, Mayor Bowser, I take my hats off to her. And
yes, messaging matters, and you know, making the statement makes a positive impact, as well as
a big stick
change the narrative.
take an action and just do
Absolutely.
it. She didn't have to say a whole lot about it. She did it. No, I applaud her. I really do.
Yes, that is absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much. Kyle, what would you like to say?
Oh, wow. What would I like to say?
What's working? What's working? And what needs to change?
Again, I'm going to zoom way out. Okay. We didn't engineer the experience that we live. And so often we're asked, well, what do you want us to do? What can we do to fix this thing? And I'm sure everybody on this phone has been, on this call has been the recipient of so many calls in the last couple of weeks. What can I do? And coming from sources you never would have imagined. I know at the Hollywood Bureau, we're being inundated with inbound calls. What can we do? How many zeros can we write on the check to make this thing go away, right? Well, we didn't engineer this. And so we've heard folks say, you know what, it's time now for those who benefit from the system that we live under to figure out, if they are sincere, to figure out how we're going to fix it.
Absolutely.
I think we
they need our help. No.
I was going to say, I think we can be very helpful.
We have an action plan.
Right. But every day, the folks on this call and so many others wake up and get roll up our sleeves and get into the business of helping to dismantle something that we never engineered. You know, the statue said, "Bring me your tired, your huddled masses yearning to be free." That speaks to an ideal that we've constantly been asking the nation to make good on, right?
Yep.
But it seems to me, in order for the nation to reach its highest heights, it's been designed to have underclass. You must maintain an underclass in order to continue this aspiration of the ideal. Because if you wipe away the underclass, then what are we aspiring to do any longer? And so sociologically, it's really perplexing to me. Nobody wants to occupy the bottom rung, right? But there's got to be somebody there. And so our whole experience has been fighting to climb up that ladder. I see Michael reacting, so let's hear what he's got to say.
I go back to the New York Times series on the history of slavery in the United States, the 1619 Project.
Yeah.
One of those articles talked specifically about the type of capitalism that we have in this country. We have a type of capitalism that is based on the slavery model. Capitalism doesn't have to be based on a slavery model, but that's what we have. I have been in conversations with people in Los Angeles who are on, the business side of the equation, and we've talked about things like funding schools, and I asked them the question: who is the beneficiary of public education in the United States? Who are the primary beneficiaries of public education? It's the business community. They get
the budget.
It's the business community that benefits from it, but they won't pay for it because they have this in their mind that that just what you were saying, that this is the way capitalism works. Well, it doesn't have to work that way. There's no question about that. But so when we talk about solutions, there are short-term solutions and there are long-term solutions. And we can talk about the long-term solutions with respect to capitalism. One of those is for us to rebuild Greenwood, rebuild Rosewood, rebuild Black Wall Street.
Yes.
We are not the only people being discriminated against.
Right.
Koreans are discriminated against. But you know what? Just a few blocks from where I live, there's a place called Koreatown. And you drop $1 in Koreatown and it stays there for 50 days.
Yes.
Because they buy and sell from each other. I agree we need to change the way capitalism is run, but to a certain extent, we need to change the way we engage with each other.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Michael.
That's number one. And number two, I just want to comment on the brothers that say we need to engage our local politicians, mayors, city council members, and we do. But I will say the biggest block to getting results are the police unions.
Very good point. I agree.
Because they put lots of dollars into the campaigns of those folks, and they meet with us and they smile with us.
I agree.
And they come up with a reason why they can't do it.
Yep. I agree.
So it's a very complicated. I'm not saying don't vote. We got to vote.
Yep.
We got to get out there and vote and to make sure that they understand that if their lack of response has consequences.
Hey,
but
Kelly,
at the same time, we need to look to the larger picture as well.
Kelly, I certainly don't want to commandeer your role as the host of this, but I'm just really curious, and I wanted to ask a question.
Sure. And we're going to save some time toward the end so that we can have an exchange between you, but feel free to say what you need.
Specifically of Kevin and Dwayne, I wanted to know what their reaction or response to the way in which Hollywood depicts law enforcement, and then more specifically how Hollywood depicts Black law enforcement, because that's, I mean, I'm trying to find the nexus between what you do and what I do, and perhaps that's a starting point.
That's a great question, Kyle. Thank you.
So I'm going to let Chief Williams go first. Now I'll chime in.
Okay, I'm going to be very brief in that area because lately I haven't had time to watch a lot of TV, or I've just been swamped. I would ask that you and I and Dwayne continue this conversation offline, because I will definitely have something to say about that. There are great depictions of law enforcement, and there are very negative depictions of law enforcement. And so this would take up a long time for me. So I'm going to defer to Dwayne, but I absolutely am committed to talking to you about that and getting some other people at the table.
Yes.
To where we'll give you enough to chew on for a century.
And Impact Media wants to be there too.
Yep. Only I would just add to that is, Kyle, we've actually been engaged more and more in movies and shows that want to know from Noble's perspective our thoughts, right? So for example, Shots Fired, The Hate You Give, some of those types of movies or shows. I actually have a call coming up, I want to say in a few days. Don't know the details, but a producer wants to talk to me. So to your point, not that that's our strong point. We don't spend a lot of energy in that space, but over the last couple of years, we've been getting more calls from Hollywood and producers, either trying to get the feedback from our police chiefs and sheriffs or members, or even coming to our conferences and presenting these movies and kind of media projects. But I'm similar to Chief Williams. We probably could spend a lot more time talking about it. But I think now I will say this: there is movement within the law enforcement community to try and do a better job. And this is where it gets a little on a slippery slope. How we kind of control the narrative or do a better job of explaining what law enforcement is and is not. So, for example, there's the project we're working with the Department of Justice on kind of a blue awareness type campaign. But the challenge with that is you got to own all of our history, meaning slave patrols to now, right? So there's that complexity. Now, one could say, well, why would no one want to be involved in trying to shape messaging? Well, our goal is to make sure it's truthful, it's honest, that it's a fair explanation of the good and the bad. And there's a lot of good, mostly good law enforcement does, I think. But to your point, we're getting more and more calls. Like I said, I've been meeting in a couple of days, don't know the details of it yet, but I'm sure it's around a movie project probably, and wanting our input on that.
So, well, you know, let me go say something, Kyle. It's really important that media and entertainment be at the table when we're discussing solutions as it relates to systemic change and social justice. And that is why Impact Media was formed, is to facilitate these cross-sector collaborations so that we can have this collective impact. And Kyle, thank you so much for asking that question, because this discussion is really, really important. Discussion here, but strategy, you know, afterwards, because the messaging and the images and the portrayal, we have to protect, like I said earlier, our brand. We have to protect our narrative at a level that we have let slip for a little bit, and on some levels. And we have to hold storytellers accountable of other races as well as our own, as it relates to telling our stories, whether they're true stories or how they're continuing to perpetuate negative stereotypes that continue to incite the hate and the fear and all of the things. We have to use these platforms for good and for change, and we can. So I'm going to
we welcome your expertise, though. We would love for it too.
Yeah.
To definitely give, because we're not such a matter of experts in this area. We would love your input. But yes,
that would be
a lot more inquiries.
Great. So I'm going to shift we're getting close toward the end. I'm going to collapse the next set of questions, and feel free to, I'm going to give you a little bit more time to collapse your answers in these categories one by one, and then we'll leave it for a little open discussion if you have something else that you'd like to say to each other. So as we're wrapping and winding down, if you want to share anything about who your key partners are, who you may aspire to partner with, and how your organization is engaging in collaboration and collective impact. So that's one area that we're collapsing into. Also, repeat your primary call to action and campaign, how people can get involved. So for example, Michael, how can people get involved to support the Centennial Campaign now? It's important now. We've got momentum now. Let's tell people how they can support and be engaged now. And then what do you feel, is needed now? That either is happening or may not be happening. What's needed now? What can everyday citizens do? We've been talking a little bit about this, but how can everyday citizens combat anti-Black racism? So if there's something you hadn't mentioned before, we can mention it now. And where do you need support the most? How can people, if you prioritize the top one or two things, what would that be? And, just how people can be involved. So whoever wants to go first. Okay, Chief Williams.
Okay, and I'll try to be very succinct. I would ask that your listeners study James Craig. He's the police chief in Detroit.
Yep.
And study his model of how he approaches policing. That man left LAPD and went out to Portland, Maine, the only Black police chief in the state. When he left 2 years later, they loved him and begged him to stay. What was he doing that was so different? Then he went to Cincinnati. Yep. He stayed there a couple of years. They loved him, wanted him to stay. Then he went to Detroit. Okay, there is a way to deliver police service in a manner that the community desires. Yep. I'm going to go back to John Thomas. What he said is true. And you don't see the problems on college campuses that you see in the community. Although these people are police and they have badges, ID cards, and guns. Many of them operate off campus also, but you rarely hear about campus police having these issues. Why? Because we deliver law enforcement in a different manner. We are transparent and we are absolutely accountable. I'm almost done. My wife asked me a question that knocked me to my knees. She's from another country. And she asked me, Kevin, when you go to a new station, how long does it take for you to know who the bad cop is? And I thought about it and I said, well, I've experienced it the same day I got there, certainly within a couple of weeks. Yep. And then she looked at me and she said, and then what did you do about it? And I said, whoa, it doesn't work that way. And she said, therein is the problem. She said, when you go to the chiefs and you meet with them, you ask that question. And I did. I went to the International Association of Chiefs of Police with chiefs around the world in the room. And I asked that question. You could have heard a pin drop. So here's what we need to do, okay? We need to require police chiefs, sheriffs, directors of public safety to hold their subordinates accountable. Yes. In every profession, you're going to have somebody that does something wrong, but there's other people who knew about it and they failed to take action. And those people need to be held accountable. The ones who knew somebody did something wrong and then failed to deal with it. That's what the community wants. They want accountability.
Yes.
Okay? This myth about defunding police, that's not what they mean. What they mean is they want to redistribute funds to support mental health and other things that police shouldn't even be involved in. They just want us to do our jobs correctly. And there are systems in place to do it. Here's the final thing. In Oregon, if you sue a department and the department loses, it comes out of the department's budget. That causes people to sit up and take notice. That requires law enforcement officers to say, hey, wait a minute. You can't do that, because then we can't get the next car, the new radio, whatever it is that we need. That system has been in place for years. They also, up in Oregon, they don't allow gypsy cops. The state steps in, and if you are a bad police officer, they revoke your certification. Just Google ethics bulletin in Oregon, and you'll see what I'm talking about. I'm done. Those are solutions.
Thank you so much, Chief Williams.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Let me say this. What he is saying is very similar to what the entertainment industry is going through with the Me Too movement. The bad actors in the Me Too movement have been around for decades, allowed to act in the despicable way that they were acting until somebody said no. And that's what these police departments have to have, somebody who's willing to step up and say no. And I understand that that's not easy, because these bad cops have weapons and these bad cops have friends. And the unions have said, we're going to step up and protect them. And you've got a state statute, the Police Officers Bill of Rights, to protect them as well. There's an entrenchment here. This is not going to happen overnight. But with brothers like you, Kevin, and Dwayne, we can make this thing work. And we got to have all hands on deck. Listen, we are where we are because, as we said earlier in this program, our forefathers have fought and died to get us to this point. And it is up to us to continue to move this ball forward. I thank both of you brothers. I had a whole lot more to say, but no, you guys said it all. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Michael. Kyle, I am going to circle back to you, Michael, for closing, for one thing, to talk about the centennial. Kyle, do you want to respond to that about the holding Hollywood accountable, the Me Too movement, and holding Hollywood accountable to culture change? Because that's something that, you know, we're really pushing with Impact Media as well. Hollywood has a corporate social responsibility around how Black people are portrayed and contributing, you know, as we talked about earlier, to the hate, to the fear, you know, that happens. And a lot of it happens even within the culture of the industry, just the way that they treat people. The Me Too movement is just one aspect of the negative culture that exists there and the discrimination that exists there. Kyle, share with us from your standpoint, you know, that final kind of closing.
Well, I appreciate your comments and Michael's comments, because they're right, they're spot on. The NAACP has always been about this conversation, even in the Hollywood space. As early as 1915, when D.W. Griffith produced the film Birth of a Nation, which depicted African Americans as buffoonish and coonish and everything that we are not. The NAACP hit the streets to try to have the film banned. Of course, unfortunately, it was not, and President Woodrow Wilson actually blessed it with the first White House screening. But we remain in that fight, and under our current leadership, Derek Johnson has really mobilized the Hollywood Bureau to be very, very active and engaging. If you think about, let's wind the clock back 20 years ago, and the way in which members of the LGBTQ community were depicted in television and film, okay, and how that has changed. Well, the reason it's changed is because folks within the Hollywood community who make content decided, you know what, we're going to shift hearts and minds on this subject matter, and they started to produce programming that showed that community in the normal way that anybody else would be depicted, and not in the stereotypic and buffoonish way that they had been previously. And slowly but surely, I mean, we got a long way to go, but slowly but surely, American society has become more understanding. And I hate to use the word tolerant, because it's not for us to tolerate anybody, but we've become more understanding of that way of life. And so we have to do the same thing with respect to the African American community, with respect to the law enforcement community. We just have to be more accurate in our depiction of the lived experience and change hearts and minds so that people understand how we got where we are and how we move forward.
Thank you, Kyle. Appreciate that. And Michael, before we close, if you can tell people how people can engage with the Centennial. And I know that you guys have a year-long campaign that you're going to unveil that involves getting people involved on a membership level and supporting financially. Tell us, is there a role for people to get involved now, or should we stay tuned?
I think you just described it. Thank you very much. Our website
I did my homework.
Our website is www.laul.org. It is going to be a year-long celebration. We're going to be starting this fall we're in the planning stages, but this is a joyous time. This organization has been around will have been around for 100 years. It began the same year that Greenwood was destroyed. And we're going to honor that legacy as well, and talk about how we're going to rebuild Greenwood and Rosewood and other communities where our economy was strong. And understand, they destroyed Greenwood because it was strong.
Yes.
They destroyed Greenwood.
Oh, very intentional.
Yeah. Then you look at where we are and what has happened. You know, we went from redlining to eliminating the legal redlining that went on, but the unlawful redlining continued. I look at you brothers in law enforcement. Kevin, you retired in 2005. After Rodney King, under a consent decree, LAPD diversified its ranks to not an acceptable degree but significantly. Since that decree has gone away, the ranks of African-American officers in LAPD has shrunk to the point where half of the African-American officers in LAPD are within 4 years of retirement.
Wow.
And there is no pipeline. So we are not getting better, we're getting worse. And so I've been working with Chief Moore and others to try to figure out how to turn that around, but understand, the system allowed it to get to this point. So, but this is not a new thing. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We will not stop.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I will bless you, brothers, for doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kyle, Kevin.
Yes, ma'am.
What I was going to say, go ahead. If the three of you, because Michael gave his how to stay engaged, just give us a social media handle, how people can stay in touch, and then we'll close.
If you don't mind, I'd like to give a quick PSA, or otherwise I'll get
Sure, that's what this is all about. This is a PSA.
So this coming week, we have 2 programs that I think are really worth paying attention to. First of all, on Thursday, the 18th, we're doing a program in association with the NFL, interestingly enough. We're screening a documentary film that I produced. It's called Fritz Pollard, A Forgotten Man. And it's about Fritz Pollard, who was the first not only African-American player in the NFL, but also the first African-American coach of the NFL. And I'm going all the way back to 1920. So we're going to screen the film, and then we're going to follow that screening with a panel discussion with current NFL players and coaches to talk about some of the more current issues that are plaguing the league, sports in general, and our society. And then the very next day, on June 19th, we're doing, the NAACP is doing a virtual Black family reunion and inviting the entire Black community to tune in online. We've got 3 hours worth of programming for you with musical performances and presentations and a town hall discussion. It's going to be a very rich experience. And I just wanted to make sure I mentioned both of those events.
Absolutely. And how can people tune into the screening on the 18th?
If you go to NAACP.org, you'll
everything
find
is going to
all
be
the information you need to know about both.
All righty. And if you could make sure that I get whatever electronic promotional material so that we can distribute it widely on social media too, I'd greatly appreciate that.
I will.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, and for those who are watching this, I am on social media. I'm on Facebook, and I like this, so there should be a link on how to get a hold of me. I will say very briefly, if you like the TV show Blue Bloods with Tom Selleck, I'm a fan of that show. It's a myth. The New York Police Commissioner does not wear a uniform. Or she, if there's ever a she, is a civilian.
That's correct.
In the city of Los Angeles, the 5 police commissioners are civilians. Though that's who sets the policy for the department, not the chief. So here's my point. Anybody listening to me, why don't you go back to your city and find out how you get on the police commission? If you don't like what's happening, get on your police commission and set policy. Because believe me, on college campuses, the policy is set by civilians. That's why you don't see the problems that you see in the community.
Wow.
So you can get active right now. You might not get paid. You might not get paid, but you might
can make
some
major
incredible
change.
Yes. Okay? Become a police commissioner in your community. You can do that now. Please step up. I'm done.
Yes. Thank you. We definitely will continue to push that and do our job in recruiting on your behalf. Dwayne, how can folks follow you and Noble?
Yeah, definitely. So Noble is on
and
Twitter.
Engage with Noble on a local level.
Yeah, absolutely. We're on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. You can follow us on Twitter at Noble NATL. I'm sorry, I say at Noble NATL on Twitter. But I just want to echo what everyone's already said. We have over 50 chapters across the country. So our website is www.noblenational.org. We have 50 chapters. There's a chapter, for example, in LA. So there are chapters across the country that you can also join. I also just want to recommend this. So there is a policing roadmap, everyone. There is a policing roadmap. It's President Obama's 21st century policing recommendation. Again, President Obama's 21st century task force policing recommendations. Now, I'm not suggesting you read the entire document, but there's an executive summary. And I would encourage people to take a look at it. Many of the things that you're seeing play out on social media or on TV or even what we're discussing right now, those recommendations are there. Now, do I think that this current administration would accept them? No. But many chiefs and sheriffs and elected officials do use them. I would suggest going to your local law enforcement agency or your elected officials and ask a basic question. Does our city or does our town follow President Obama's 21st century police recommendation? Now, these came out of Ferguson, Missouri. So on Michael Brown, and again, my condolences to his family, but when he was killed, a task force was created by President Obama's administration to do a holistic analysis of this. They did interviews across the country. Private citizens were involved. A task force was formed. But please look at that. Number two, when our forefathers and foremothers had really no real laws on the book in protecting us, we did have the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law. So when someone says to you, what is your constitutional right? There's a number of rights you got. One is First Amendment, right to protest, right to assembly, freedom of speech. But it's also, from a law enforcement standpoint, equal protection under the law. Now, I'm looking through rose-colored glasses. I understand it's more complex than that. But what I worry sometimes is when we go into these settings like city council meetings and so forth, all you need to know is that 14th Amendment, I should get equal protection, period. And
yes.
Policing, just get the executive summary of President Obama's recommendations. It's a pleasure to be on this program, though. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwayne. Can I get a copy of that? And is that something that we can share on social media?
Yes. Yeah. So I'm gonna be.
So we're gonna make that go viral. That's gonna be a cool
I'm gonna be a bunch of stuff. But yes. Yeah.
All righty. Okay. This has been absolutely incredible, impactful. We are going to continue to engage. If you're open online, but definitely, offline, regarding strategic next steps of how we can, work together and work toward collective impact in collaboration and bringing on other partners And we do represent a lot of other partners that are not able to be here today, but I thank you for being here. They only allow us to have 6 people on the screen at once, so we were a little limited to that, but this is a great first start around action steps after the protest. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm gonna do some closing remarks, but we will be in touch. This is to be continued. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I honor you. Thank you. Wow. It was so important that we have this conversation for such a time as this. And I'm so grateful to be able to serve in this capacity. Just to give you a heads up, next week, we're planning to continue the discussion. You know, our plan is to involve more national leaders, and women will be at the table. You don't want to miss it. Until then, let's all continue to inspire and engage people in strategic protesting and social justice. And in closing, I would like to share a devotional that my cousin, Alfred Dotson, shared with me earlier today. It's actually based on one of my favorite scriptures, which is what I built this organization on in terms of how I'm called to serve. And this devotion is titled, Let Your Light Shine. And it reads, famed philosopher and orator Edmund Burke once said, all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. It's true. Doing nothing is easy, but it's also dangerous. Where there is no opposition to evil, evil will multiply. We all fall into the trap of complaining about the things that are wrong, but complaining does nothing except discourage us even more. It changes nothing because there is no positive power in it. Imagine what a mess the world would be if all God did was complain about everything that has gone wrong since he created it. But the Father doesn't complain. He continues to be good and work for justice. Evil is powerful, but good is more powerful. We need to stop and realize that God has chosen to work on this earth through his children, you and me. His light is inside us, and we can't afford to do nothing. We must let our light shine, no matter what, as we live our lives doing good in his name. Let's join in prayer. Lord, it's very easy to sit back and do nothing, but it's so much better to actively let your light shine. Help me, help us stand in opposition to evil and act on your goodness every chance I get. And as Matthew 5:16 reads, even so, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. And in closing, in the words of my dear mentor, C.T. Vivian, whenever I leave his presence, whether on the phone or in person, he says, until I see you then. I'll see you then, my sister, my brother. Stay strong, stay with us. We're standing with you, and we're standing strong together. Thank you.